So when I talk about, for example, digital literacy training or skills and literacy training and awareness training within a digital world, it means that we need to create more programs where we become aware of how our actions and how our reactions impact on the way the digital world is going to look like in the future. And that's kind of missing right now.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. So Ellen, thank you so much for joining me on The No Show. I'm really pleased to have you.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to invite me. It's great to be here.
It was really interesting for me when I was sort of looking through your profile. One of the words that jumped out to me was digital inequalities. What sort of drove you to the path of researching digital inequalities?
Yeah, I have a long background in studying kind of social identity and participation and vulnerability in society more in general before the digital even existed. So I've always been interested in looking at how people feel that they are represented within society in general, but also how they are able to participate and contribute to that society by the stories that they tell or the way in which they are able to engage with the kind of structures that exist in wider society. And so I actually started studying soaps and telenovela in the good old days when there wasn't any internet yet. But this has kind of expanded and exploded into looking broader into this digital space, and where as I was taking that knowledge from other other research in terms of participation in society and representation of different groups in society into this digital world, or the world that was becoming increasingly digital, we could see that some of these patterns started replicating themselves, and that people were talking about how important it would be that everybody had equal access to these technologies to be able to, not just participate in a kind of functional way in society, but also to be able to represent their points of view, represent themselves, be full citizens. So access was really important when I started. And then in the work that we've been doing, because we started noticing that there was a lot of kind of optimism around giving technologies to people. And, we can see that now as well. This is coming back. It's like, how important is it to have like a good mobile phone or a tablet to be able to participate in things like education during the pandemic? We've heard a lot about how some kids are not being able to participate, but also in the work floor, like since a lot of people were encouraged to work from home, for people who didn't have the right kinds of access, that was really difficult, and it really makes you almost not a full citizen if you can't have access to the technologies. Now, I have to say that our work has developed a little bit beyond that, because it became clear very soon that this pure access wasn't enough. That, for example, kids who just have a mobile phone, or have a mobile phone but don't really understand how the digital world works, or they don't have the kinds of skills to be able to interact and know who to trust online, that those kids were being left behind, even if they had access. So we started saying, and this is what we call kind of the second level digital divide, and what I describe in my book around inequalities and actually the ability to learn through technologies, which is beyond skills, right? It's just, is the kind of content that is online, is it interesting to you? Does it reflect kind of my kind of knowledge? And this is the world in which I live. And so we saw that there was many more concerns beyond access. And so the book is really, although it discusses access and these kind of economic inequalities of people being able to afford technologies, it's much more about the other stuff, the stuff that actually happens once we are online and using these technologies. Yeah.
It's really interesting because, I mean, I'm I'm an inside outsider to academia, and even though I'm not in the formal institutions myself, I've been working with the universities for a long time, and one of the things that I could see clearly happening in the sort of outbreak of the pandemic was how poorly prepared universities were to deal with this sort of change in this change in the way education had to be sort of given to students. And so is something like the pandemic and major shocks like this, are they levelers, or do they exacerbate the problem of inequality in general?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. So as an academic, I will always say it's a little bit more complicated than just one or the other, right? In some ways, they have been a leveler. I think the realization that a lot of, especially when we talk about education, that there's still a lot of differences between different students or young people who are trying to participate in learning online, that there's still massive differences based on people's socioeconomic background, the kind of resources that their parents have, in their ability to actually access the internet or anything that's online in relation to education. And so in that sense, it's been a leveler because there's been a really increase in efforts by governments, by NGOs to provide this kind of access, because this realization, we couldn't avoid it anymore, right? Everybody was aware. I think where the leveling has been less clear, and where we are concerned that there might actually be an increase of these kind of inequalities or disadvantages and vulnerabilities, is when it comes to like kind of these digital skills that people need to be able to use the technology once they have access, and also in the terms of the ways in which people are able to engage with the content that's online to achieve kind of benefits in your everyday life, or to avoid some of the more negative aspects that might come from technology use. Because what we see is that young people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, they tend to have more problems in understanding how to navigate the information. We talk a lot about fake news. There's a lot of talk about fake news or misinformation. And we see that young people who come from backgrounds in which they might not have the same kind of support from parents, or where parents are not able to support because they don't have that background themselves, or they might live on their own under very complicated circumstances, that they really struggle to acquire these kinds of skills to be able to navigate that world. And on the other hand also, which is an important part, we often call these technologies information and communication technologies, and most of what we see is the emphasis on the information, also in these discussions around fake news, right? But actually a really important part of information and communication technologies is the communication part. If we think about what we do in our everyday lives, most of what I do is communicate and interact with other people. Yep. Yeah, I also look for information. And we see there a really big amplification of the experience of participating in communication. Like if we talk about Zoom, yeah, this is kind of the platform we're using right now. The people that are comfortable participating in this kind of communicative interaction, which is also used a lot for education, are the people who have been comfortable or come from backgrounds in which they feel confident about participating and having their voice heard, right, and are not fearful of being discriminated or kind of, put down in these kinds of interactions. It's a very confronting tool, these online communication, where you're like a little box and you're personal, you get highlighted when you're talking. So yeah,
I mean, that's a fantastic point. And I think one of the things that I mean, you talk about sort of public policy and a rush by governments and that sort of stuff to, I guess, in one way or another, improve these digital inequalities, even though they're just trying to like fulfill a sort of a function. But is there is there an increasing role of businesses to contribute to tackling the problem? Is it? I mean, is this something that has been changing, or do businesses just serve whoever's paying?
Yeah, so the payment issue is an interesting issue because a lot of the stuff supposedly that is in this digital world is free, right? We might have to pay for the device, but then once we're online, a lot of stuff is provided for free. And the way in which this works, the stuff that's provided for free, is often on getting enough clicks or likes or generating mass audiences, or being able to really target those people with advertising or with kind of personalized content from other businesses. so that you will keep using their technology so that they can then expose you to more other businesses and companies that will give the people who are providing these services money for you. It's a kind of free labor, we might call it, right? Our use of technology translates into advertising and other revenues, because we can be sold to the companies that would like to have our personal data. So there's two sides to this. Because most of the platforms that we are using and most of the content that's created online in these digital spaces is created and managed by commercial companies. They are the ones who are moderating this content, who are creating the algorithms, designing the algorithms that allows us to see the things and find the things that are online. So it cannot just be policy kind of makers in that sense, or kind of other kind of company or organizations that are nonprofit that are part of this space, because the world is being created by these commercial companies. And so there has also been a big push to make people responsible, these big companies like Google and Facebook, like the big five that are mentioned in this sense, to be more responsible also in terms of how they design their platform to achieve equal outcomes for all. Because yes, a lot of people are able to take advantage of the opportunities, interact with others, find wonderful content, have really positive experiences online, but there's also a significant proportion of users who don't have that, and that is unequally distributed. And so there's now more and more of a push by consumers, but also in that sense by regulators and policymakers, for companies to design that into the technology. So that's one side from regulators, but also within companies, we see this discussion happening, and how honest it is, we can talk about that, but that they need to be more representative in terms of the people that work for them. The tech sector is one of the least representative in terms of gender, ethnicity, and kind of, these general groups that we know are kind of underrepresented in terms of power in society. And unless that changes, unless they become more representative of the people who are out there, it's likely that the people who are creating technologies are going to keep creating technologies in their own image, right? In the image of who they are and what they like and what they feel comfortable with, and they might not even spot that. So I think there's a kind of still a lot of work to be done, and it has to come from society and from people who want to stand up for the rights of people who have been underrepresented and underserved in this digital world, because that's, in the end, it is revenue that these commercial companies are interested in. So, but it has to come from the consumer, user, active citizen, for them to change their minds, because they will realize that it doesn't work. They will lose customers. Yeah.
So let me ask you a little bit about the book. So the Digital Disconnect is basically a compilation of the research that you've been doing with academics around the world, and it's a variety of different sort of bits of research that you've done in terms of the methods that you use, etc. So from the research based that the book is based on, what sort of experiences did you have in seeing these socio digital inequalities?
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating for me, and it's also been confrontational, like, we're doing this podcast in video format, so you can see what I look like, and I come from a certain ethnographic background. I'm higher educated. I work for the London School of Economics. I've done a PhD. And even though I'm conscious of this, and this is my work, but it sometimes be very confrontational to do this work around the world in different contexts, but also in the UK, where I've also done a lot of work. And I'll give you some examples of some of the things that were eye-openers for me, even though I've worked a long time in this field. We've done some work with young people who are not in education, employment, or training. And one of the things that we realized there was that their experience, for example, of being rejected for a job in a digital space, even though it was the same as being objectively from the outside, it was very similar to being rejected, for somebody else with better position being rejected. So even though both people were rejected objectively in the same way in digital spaces when they were looking for jobs, for these young people from these disadvantaged backgrounds, it was a very personal thing. they had the feeling that, for example, when they sent in a job application and they didn't hear back, that that there was a person sitting there saying like, oh my God, look at this person, they're never going to work for us. Like, we know what these kinds of people are like, right? Well, if that happened for people with a different background, they were like, oh, there were probably a lot of people who applied, or they were looking for somebody very specific. I will try again, it will work sometime. So what the same kind of experience felt very different and had very different consequences. Like for these young people who are not in education, employment, or training, it meant that they said, you know what, I'm going to go to the corner shop because at least they will look me in the face and reject me. And I'm not going to try this digital space anymore, therefore missing out on some of the opportunities that were there. So these kinds of things were really confrontational or eye-opening for me when I was doing this research. And the same thing when I've done research, for example, in Latin America, where I lived for a very long time, but now also going back to do research and comparing the situation there versus the situation in countries like the UK or kind of other European countries, where we actually saw that in Latin America, in Chile in this case, people with lower levels of education, formal education, when they were given access to technology and when they were taught some kind of these more technical skills to use technology, they were actually incredible at finding and problem solving, finding information, problem solving. While in Europe, formal education was a far better predictor of people not being able to engage as much with the content that was available. So it says something about the inequalities that historically have existed, where it's very unequally distributed in terms of education. The fact that you don't have formal education often doesn't really reflect your ability to learn or to participate in society in general, because it's very much very, very based on class or the resources of your parents. Well, in a country like the Netherlands, this is not as much the case. So we can see that even the same kind of, from the outside looking in, the same kind of situation where we would say, oh, this is what we expect with our Western, kind of European research hat on. And then we go to a different country in a different situation and we find completely different things. And it's very interesting to see, the kind of resources that people have who have been really had to struggle sometimes historically for long times, and then the opportunities that they are able to take up when they do get the chance to engage in a meaningful way with technologies.
You rightly point to the idea that there needs to be more of a collective approach to dealing with these inequalities in the digital space. What kind of things do you propose, or do you suggest? What kind of collaborations, what kind of joint effort can be done?
Yeah. I guess the important is to put that against the kind of initiatives and interventions that are very common right now in this space. One is that they're very individualistic in the sense of like, let's give, this individual who doesn't have access, let's give them access, or this person lacks programming skills, or technically even more basic technical skills to engage with the technology. So let's put them on a course, right? Or teach them these skills. That's the kind of stuff that's out there that is really important. But what it doesn't do is to kind of fundamentally change these kind of underlying patterns that shape the design of and the use of technology. So when I refer to this collective responsibility that we all have, it's a kind of a call to step a little bit away from the victim blaming or the kind of, these people should catch up and we'll teach them skills and we'll give them access, towards an understanding that whatever we do online, like if I click on a certain link and not on another link, it means that that link will be more visible for the people who come after me, right? Or if I react to some people of a certain background or with certain characteristics online in a positive way, but I react negatively to other people who might look or sound or feel different, then that has an impact on not just on the person that I'm interacting with, but on everybody else who's in that space. They might learn from me, subconsciously, they might see what I'm doing. So when I talk about, for example, digital literacy training or skills and literacy training and awareness training within a digital world, it means that we need to create more programs where we become aware of how our actions and how our reactions impact on the way the digital world is going to look like in the future. And that's kind of missing right now. And when we talk about the organizations or kind of how that might work, instead of kind of coming at it from the point of view of digital and tech companies who have the digital very strongly front of mind, collaborations with organizations who have worked over history and kind of over the centuries to promote human rights, or to promote rights of other people, or who represent people who might not have a voice, or who are very aware of discriminatory practices or things like that in a traditional sense. Those are the organizations that we need to work with. When I do work with government, it's not necessarily the research and innovation and tech department or ministry that I would want to work with. I would want to work with the Department of Education, right? And I want to work with the Department of Work and Pensions, or the Health Ministry, because all of these people are providing services that hopefully should reach everybody equally. And should have equal, not just equal access, but kind of equal participation and benefits, depending on, not depending on where somebody comes from, but what their needs are and what they need to do to improve their quality of life. And so we need to shift away a little bit from this techno-deterministic, individualistic view, and work with organizations who have a kind of broader social remit, but who need to understand that the digital is really important, and that this cannot be solved by just one person, but that this is about advocacy, consumer citizenship, movements, and services, and that this is about all of us taking responsibility for not just complaining about the terrible things that might happen in the digital world, but actually realizing that we are all collectively contributing to that. And if we want a different world, we're going to have to behave differently and motivate other people to behave differently by our actions and our interactions.
Absolutely. Ellen, where can people find you online?
I am on Twitter, so it's Ellen Hell, that's the handle. And then you can find me. Actually, there's not a lot of people in the world with my name. There is, as far as I know, only one Ellen Helsper. So I think the best way to find me is probably just to Google me.
Yeah.
If you can get the spelling of my name right, you will find me. You can people can also email me on e.j.helsper at lsc.ac.uk, and I'm happy to answer any questions or to engage in discussion and dialogue around these topics, which I think are extremely important.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video, and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.